Speaker's announced policy of January 4th, 2021. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee, for 30 minutes.
Let me thank the Speaker for his courtesies and begin with a clarion call. The Speaker wears many hats, and we have been in meetings where we have focused our legislative prowess, legislative questions on voting rights. And so I think it is appropriate to begin today to say that a crisis is pending. I'm stunned by this decision. I am aghast. I will not use the word enraged because action requires a calm and contemplative mind. But today, the Supreme Court upheld voting restrictions. They might have written it and said they upheld voting laws. They upheld voting restrictions in Arizona and signaled that challenges in new state laws making it harder to vote. My God, I'm going to say that on this floor. Making it harder to vote in spite of the constitutional privilege that is ensconced in 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment that generates into the states the dignity of humanity, that citizenship's birthright is the right to be precise in your desires of your representation. And then it signaled in this article that challenges to new state laws making it harder to vote would have a hostile reception from a majority in the justices. The vote, just as we expected, all of the court packing has bore fruit. Give me for, I wanted to be on this floor speaking eloquently, if you will, about a myriad of things. But 6-3 vote, not even a light of difference. 3 that were not appointed by Republican presidents. And then, of course, the packing by the former President of the United States. And by the way, I just want to make a public statement. I know the First Amendment has its privileges. I asked the media to call the former president the former president. He is not the President of the United States. He's not president and his name. He is the former president. He is not president and his name at the border. He is the former president at the border, creating havoc. And havoc was created with this 6-3 vote. The decision was the court's first consideration of how a crucial part of the Voting Rights Act of 1965 applies to voting restrictions that have a disproportionate impact on members of minority groups, and it was issued as disputes over voting rights have taken center stage, and how we are still suffering from the Shelby case of 2013 that indicated that the Section 5, Provision 4, is unconstitutional and has left us with no tools to deal with this. As Republican-controlled state legislatures increasingly seek to impose restrictions, new voting rules, we are in the fight of our life. So I'm on the floor of the House today to indicate that there is no divide in any of us thanking the Congressional Black Caucus, Chairwoman Beatty, on the urgency of voting rights, and the Judiciary Committee, and the chairman of that committee, the subcommittee chairman of that committee, and all the members and staff. We needed this decision to be able to craft the record that is going to withstand and fight the battle and be able to pass what the Supreme Court cannot undermine with its decision. In fact, we must thwart its decision. We must protect the vulnerable. We must not allow the disabled to be videotaped in Texas. We must not allow the hungry and thirsty to be denied water and food in Georgia. We must not allow judges to overturn willy-nilly the elections in Texas. And we must not allow, if I might, the idea of, we must not allow the idea of a former officer of the United States, in fact, the chief officer of the United States, we must not allow that person to make mockery of the order of government. There is but one president of the United States, that is President Joe Biden. There is but one vice president, Vice President Kamala Harris, and they are effectively leading this government and this nation. They are caring people. President Biden is, as we speak, either there or en route to the enormous tragedy in Surfside, Florida, to provide comfort, but also to provide the strength of the federal government in any investigation that will proceed. That is the able work of the Florida delegation and this president. They will do their job, particularly those members who represent that area in Debbie Wasserman Schultz and many other members. But it is challenging to be thwarted in voting and to ignore the Constitution of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment. And so today, I want to proceed with what I think is a necessary agenda that is so important to this nation. And so you'll hear me talk about so many different aspects of the issue of governance, why voting is so important, and why we need to close the social and racial divide, or racial and social equity should be intertwined. So let me emphasize, if you will, the enormous difference that what we are going to be working on over the next couple of weeks is going to make in lives. And that is, of course, the child tax credit. I just want to briefly, because votes and the winning of the majority in 2020 of the House and Senate by Democrats, and of course, the new president and vice president, led us to the expanded and improved child tax credit. It is a historic change that is a lifeline to the middle class and cuts child poverty. It provides children and their families with additional payments the year that helps them with the cost of food, child care, diapers, health care, clothing, and taxes. I'll be in my town, Houston, Texas, on July 3rd, yes, the Independence Weekend, to be able to open the eyes of my mothers and fathers caring for children, that this is their legitimate opportunity to receive monthly payments, $250 per month per child and $300 per month for every young child. All the families in my community can feel more secure and better able to deal with the burdensome expenses that face them weekly and monthly. Let me be very clear. This brings America together. this idea of the child tax credit. But let me remind you, it was because of our votes, your votes, that elected a Democratic majority, not a majority that does not include a desire to work in a bipartisan manner. We do desire that. And I think this is the first opportunity that I've had since the historic passage, maybe the second, in a moment that I can say to the chamber and to this historic congressional record, a large thank you for bipartisanship that has brought about, after 38 years, the historic Juneteenth holiday that was celebrated because it was signed on June 17th, the first historic holiday on June 18th. Thank you to Opal Lee. Thank you to the initiator of a state holiday in Texas, Al Edwards. But more importantly, thank you to that teacher in the airport that stopped me and said, "Thank you for Juneteenth. I can now teach the original sin of slavery to even elementary school children, not out of anger and hatefulness, but the whole story of America's original sin and what liberation, emancipation, and freedom represents." Thank you to the quote of President Joe Biden that said he may be known for many things in his administration, but he will probably be remembered for signing the Juneteenth holiday. I am grateful to my colleagues for allowing me to lead, to have introduced that bill, the first member of Congress to do so, and I'm grateful for members in the other body, Senator Markey and Senator Cornyn, who rallied so that the Senate could move and that in one day we could pass it in the House, take the bill that I introduced that the Senate then took, and to the leadership here, how much we exalted this body when it was a 415-person vote. I hope with that vote that there are those thinking that, wow, I voted for that. I'm not finished, because we are not finished. Because if anything reinforces that our journey is not finished, it must be the idea that today the Supreme Court rendered a decision that completely turns upside down the writing of the John Lewis Enhancement Act, led so ably by my colleague and friend, Congresswoman Terry Sewell, a bill that will come through the House Judiciary Committee, that we will be able to be the fixers, the doctors, those who will hold the Constitution Act and say, no, the Supreme Court, though the highest body in the land, in this instance, because of the court packing, is wrong. Because the Founding Fathers did not intend for us to have a restraint on that unfettered right of voting. My friends, we would not be in the midst of the debate right now of the INVEST Act that is going to provide such a new difference in our lives. That is because of the vote. Thank you to the chairman of the Transportation Committee, and Mr. DeFazio, because now that first step will be toward rebuilding the nation's roads, bridges, transit, rail, and we'll be fighting against climate change. Look at our western region where hundreds are impacted, thousands, millions, but then they have lost tens upon tens, maybe hundreds of people, maybe, but certainly numbers who've died from the enormous heat. We actually passed that historic bill today, and I'm very proud that part of it, working out of Energy and Commerce and working with Chairman Pallone, that we have provided real dollars to communities for wastewater infrastructure. You know that is important. We have done that through the Clean Water State Revolving Fund. We have provided, I want you to understand, that historic funding levels for drinking water, state revolving fund, and making improvements to prioritize replacing lead service lines that have plagued so many of our Midwestern states and Southern states, our public housing, improving water quality in schools. I know it well because my schools are old, and children, before the historic water systems, bottled water, they were drinking out of those old water fountains. And addressing needs in territories, reforming the broken standard setting to make it work better as it relates to public health, and to eliminate toxins. The vote, the right to vote. The right to vote is an extremely vital part. And as we have had the right to vote, and each member has had the right, I'm glad to publicly announce that I will have complete reformation of a historic street in my district, Scott Street, the right to vote, with the grant that was awarded through me to Houston and Metro in the city of Houston, which we'll be announcing soon. Those of you living in and around Scott Street, the University of Houston, Texas Southern University, there'll be a new light, a new opportunity. And then we will be able to expand on the Greenways project, neighborhood greenways. I've heard you. I've heard the neighborhood. And so we will have that opportunity. And through voting, the Jackson Lee Esplanade Amendment, it's in now, it's law, going on to the Senate to be finally passed, and I'm going to be an optimist that we were able to have an amendment in the Safe Streets program where funds are spent to require state departments, or this amendment gives local governments more control over where the funds for the new Safe Streets program are spent by requiring the State Department of Transportation that ignores local governments. They're ignoring local governments right now in my community on I-45. They ignore them. By expanding I-45 and taking out houses and schools and buying up historic neighborhoods, they are wrong. TxDOT, you are wrong. And we will continue to investigate until you realize that you're wrong. But I have an amendment now that says that local governments must be heard and they must be consulted with on the amount of dollars to help them carry out Safe Streets projects. And that is to use the Safe Streets program to set aside safety funds to reduce fatalities and serious injuries on public roads with a focus on vulnerable road users such as pedestrians, bicyclists, scooters, users, and motorcyclists. Why? People are dying. In my district, a lady stopped her car to help a wheelchair person get across the street. Another car hit her and the wheelchair person and killed them. Not even stopping. Who needs to have the resources but our local government? And then, of course, we have seen death take a toll on motorcycle bike riders. Bike Texas has been fighting for this. And we lost a young man a few years ago. And as he was riding his bike in the Heights area, I promised his family he lost his life. The lady who lost her life that's pushing the wheelchair was Lesha White, 54. And she was helping Jesus Jesse Perez to cross. Miss White pulled over and got out. And as I said, another vehicle struck them. And they were both killed. And on March 7th, 2019, right before the pandemic, I went to the spot. David Leon Lawyer was killed in the collision with a school bus while riding his bicycle. And that was the way he got around in the Heights. This is in their name, to make local governments take charge of those dollars and to help stop that kind of violence, which it is. And then the motorcycle riders, they have motorcycle clubs, and they are ignored. And in the name of Jamal Harris, was killed around Mother's Day, or in May, this amendment was put forward. I was able as well. In the freeze, we suffered. People died. And so I have an amendment that was passed, will now become law, requires the EPA administrator to initiate a study on the distribution of wastewater infrastructure funds to rural communities, economically disadvantaged communities, and tribal communities during the 20 fiscal years preceding. And the reason is because there has been the understanding that wastewater resources in inner city infrastructure and rural is poor, not working, and you feel the impact. I'm grateful. But again, I'm going to say voting. And then, of course, we know the freeze. So many died. In the early February, President again came to acknowledge something that we had never experienced. Our whole grid shut down, which is why we need the American Jobs Plan in its totality. I stand with my friends in the Congressional Progressive Caucus, the Budget Committee, and the Congressional Black Caucus, and all of the Democratic Caucus, that we must go big. We must work with this bipartisan legislation, but we must get climate change. We must get the care economy, and we must deal with the broadband and cyber. But in this, the electric grids have been failing, and so my amendment, under this particular amendment, implements a program under which the administrator may award grants to community water systems to carry out activities to educate and assist persons by the community water system in adapting and responding to bad acts and natural disasters, including sub-zero temperatures. What does that mean is that our pipes froze, people still suffering from freezing, and those pipes busted, destroyed homes. Not only did people die, frozen to death, because they had no electricity, but they had no water. And I remember standing and giving out water to thousands. And when I say that, being part of giving out water to thousands all over our community. We were giving out water in 2021. They had no water. Not only did they have no water, but it took a very long time. I do want to put into the record this word to show you why the wastewater is so important. The path-breaking 2019 study and report said, flushed and forgotten, sanitation wastewater in the rural states, and it was conducted by the Alabama Center for Rural Enterprise and the Columbia Law School for Human Rights. It indicated sanitation is essential to everyday functions such as urination and defecation. Without a system in place to dispose of wastewater, individuals experience environmental contamination. The perpetual appearance of wastewater in and around homes that occurs when systems are absent or failing takes a significant toll on mental health and the ability of individuals to live in dignity. Do you realize that that is occurring in America? That's why I'm here today. And I'm here today because no one is going to tell me, with conditions like this, that we don't need the American Jobs Plan and that we don't need the dollars that will stop flooding in Houston, which we have built up enormously. No one is going to tell me that we don't need the child tax credit for each and every one of you. That's why we will be in Houston at July the 3rd. We will be in Houston July the 3rd because these children need these resources. And then let me spend the time, if the speaker would tell me the remaining time, please.
The gentlelady has 7 minutes remaining.
Thank you. So I want to just take a moment to physically hold this one up and to emphasize how important our children are before I raise another very vital point. One, it was because of votes that we got the Children's Health Insurance Program. And it will be because of votes that we get the expanded, or that we got the expanded child tax credit, that you will get $250 for the older children, $300 for younger children every single month. Meet me at the St. John's Church at 10 a.m. on July 3rd to ensure that you get the right information. This is not a sales job. This is what voting and representation is all about. And so I want to be able to conclude my remarks with something that has been, Mr. Speaker, very important, and I hope that its explanation is one that is taken not historically in the way that it should. And I want to ignore, not to ignore the attack on democracy, and to acknowledge the leadership of this House for the January 6th committee. I have worked on a select committee. I am a member who was here for 9/11, and when I say here, I was literally in this Capitol, and among others, fled out of this Capitol and watched the billowing smoke that was the results of the hit at the Pentagon as we were escaping. And so I take very seriously the issues of January 6th. I want to also briefly acknowledge the work that we've done with ensuring that Confederate statues were removed and to put them in the place of history, but not a place that is the citadel of democracy, when there were those that stood up against that democracy. I want to acknowledge the validity of the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act and pay tribute to this family that has been so sacrificing to try to make things right. But now I want to proceed with what I think must be our next step with voting, is the H.R. 40, the Commission to Study Slavery and Develop Reparation Proposals. And I want to take away any glare or misunderstanding that this is a figment of our imagination. This is something that we should do in passing. It is an impossibility. It is a third rail. If we do this, something will happen. I welcome, and I am here present to speak to all of my colleagues, Democrats and Republicans. But I want you to look at the back of this slave. The silence is deadening as to what occurred for almost a quarter of 1,000 years, in bondage over 200 years. We have difficulty in detailing the actual facts of the precise brutality in every plantation, in every nuance, in every northern state, in every southern state, in every western state, and every eastern, because it was prevalent everywhere. There were different times when it ended. Certainly, December 1865 was when the 13th Amendment was so eloquently debated, with difficulty, and it was passed. But H.R. 40 is the distinct opportunity internationally for America's presence to be known that we are back, that we are willing to acknowledge the original sin. We're not here accounting for my neighbor who will tell me that he or she did not have slaves. That is not the accounting that we are, in essence, looking at. We're not looking to be able to see whether or not my other neighbor just left slavery. Slavery is part of America's history. The DNA and the progeny of slavery are here in America. You cannot ignore them. They are the foundation of this nation. They built the place I now stand. Slaves. They built the White House. Slaves. They built infrastructure. They created cotton and made it king, never to be given any compensation for years of work. No health insurance, no insurance, no workman's comp, no salary. But as the UN Human Rights Council has said, reparations should not only be equated with financial compensation, it should include restitution, rehabilitation, acknowledgement of injustices, apologies, memorializations, educational reform, and guarantees that such injustices won't happen again. The legislation itself is a non-threatening and serious legislation. It is a reflection of what General Sherman tried to do. He tried to remedy the back that we see here today. He tried to give 40 acres and a mule. Can you imagine the conglomerate that would have occurred if 5, 6, 10, 20 slaves had come together with that? And believe me, slaves did not ask in anger. In fact, as they did not get it, they made their way. But as they made their way, we can cite 19 sites almost in America where what slaves built was destroyed. Greenwood, 100 years, is an example. Greenwood is an example of a cry for reparations. Mother Fletcher and Mother Randall and our sergeant, her brother, articulate that they never got anything and all that they had in Greenwood was taken from them. What an unbelievable scenario that we're facing. And so my plea today is that as you've listened to me, I leave here to go fight for voting rights. But I also leave here with a challenge and an encouragement for the understanding of all that I've said, Mr. Speaker, but more importantly, as I close, H.R. 40, the Commission to Study and Develop Reparation Proposals. I look forward to working with our leadership and all others to ensure that we do make this an important step forward. I yield back.
The gentlelady has yielded back. The chair announces the Speaker's appointment pursuant to Section 2 of House Resolution 503, 117th Congress.